Hello, everyone. So we're going to continue solving quadratic equations. Now, before we continue with quadratic, with solving, we need to look into what we call complex numbers or imaginary numbers. So there are some type of imaginary, so basically imaginary numbers, we get them by square rooting a negative number. So think about it as the solution to the square root of a negative number is being represented by an I, and we call those numbers imaginary numbers. So basically, imaginary numbers are in the form of BI, where B is just a non-real number. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to take the square root of let's say I want to take the square root of 4. Well, I know that the square root of 4 is 2. How do I know that it's 2? Because if I multiply 2 by itself, it actually gets me 4, right? But let's say I want to take the square root of a negative number. How can I find two numbers that when multiplied by each other will give you 4? Well, there's no number that if you multiply by itself will give you -4, right? It has to be, so technically in that case, we say we cannot take the square root of a negative number. Now, to be able to take the square root of a negative number, we use the imaginary number I. So in this case, the square root of -4 would be 2I. All right. The one thing that you gotta know about I is that I is equivalent to the square root of a negative number over -1. Okay. And let's just say I want to square I. Well, the square root of I would be -1. All right. So those are really the main things that I want you to know about imaginary numbers. Every time you want to take the square root of a negative number, you have to write an I. I will go over why this works when I'm back. Just for now, understand that every time you want to take the square root of a negative number, you have to have the I. I is equivalent to the square root of -1. I square is equivalent to -1. Let's just do another quick example. Let's say I want to take the square root of, let's just do, let's just do the square root of -18, right? So let's say, obviously, -18 is not a perfect square, or 18 is not a perfect square, so we're gonna have to break it down. So then that would be 9 and 2, and then that would be 3 and 3. If I put everything back in, I would have 3 times 3 times 2. I have a pair, take it out, so then that would be 3 radical 2. Now remember that you start with the -18. So if I wanted to take this, if I wanted to write this as an answer, it needs to have an I. Okay. So remember, you gotta have that I in order to square root negative numbers. To do another quick example, the square root of -16 would be, wait, that's not what I meant. Yeah, the square root of -16 would be 4I. Okay. All right. Now, taking that into account, let's go ahead and solve this quadratic equation. So remember that to be able to solve a quadratic equation, you can either factor it, you can complete the square, or you can use a quadratic formula. Let's go ahead and try the factoring. So then that would be 3, -2. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 3 and add up to -2. That would be 3 and 1. One of them has to be negative. In this case, I would think it's -3. However, this doesn't work because -3 times 1 would give you -3, which is not what you want. In order to get a 3, you would want both of them to be either positive or negatives, but again, it wouldn't work. -3 times -1 would give you +3, but -3 plus -1 would give you -4. So that wouldn't work. In this case, factoring doesn't work. I'm gonna go ahead and try the quadratic formula. Okay, so I know that that's my A, my B, and my C. All I'm gonna go ahead and do is plug them in. So that would be -2 plus or minus b squared. That would be -2 squared, 4 minus, or 4ac. That would be 1, 3, and then 2a. Cool. Let's go ahead and simplify this. I know that would be 4. That would be 8. 12. So then this would be negative times a negative equals a positive. So that would be 2 plus or minus 4 minus 12. So 4 plus -12, that would be -8, and then 2. All right. So those would be my solutions. Now, the one thing that we're going to notice is that we have a negative square root, which means that we're going to have an I-th. We're going to have to also, simplify this. So the square root of of 8 can be broken down into 4 and 2, 2 and 2. So then that would be 2 times 2 times 2. There's one pair. So then that would be 2 radical 2. All right. Now, but we do have an I. So we will rewrite this as x equals 2 plus or minus. This is now that. So we're going to write 2 radical 2. But remember that the a was negative. So we're going to have an I divided by 2. Okay. So at some point, you are going to have imaginary or what we call complex solutions. Complex solutions, it just means that it has imaginary numbers in it, which means that it's not actually physically touching the x-intercepts. It still have but it still has x-intercepts. They're just not real. Okay. One thing that I would mention is, yes, this would be your answer. And it's an imaginary answer, but you need to simplify it. So I could actually divide both by 2. So I would be left with x equals 2 divided by 2, which is 1, plus or minus 2 divided by 2, which is also 1i radical 2. So that would be your simplified complex solution. Okay. Other than that, the process is the same. At some point, you are going to have complex solutions. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention and continue is at some point, you will do operations with complex solutions. And this is basically what you're going to be seeing. When it comes to doing operations with complex solutions, is basically the same thing as simplifying expressions. So for instance, number 1, I am adding -4 plus 6i, so that's an imaginary complex number, plus -2 minus 9i, again, another complex number. This is simply as combining like terms. I have a plus, which means that it really doesn't do anything. So I could actually rewrite this without parentheses. Plus -2 minus 9i. And all I would simply do is combine like terms. Okay, so my answer would be -4 plus -2, which is -6. And 6i plus -9i, which would be -3i, and that would be my answer. Simple as combining like terms. Okay. You would do the same thing for something that looks like that. The only difference would be that that one has a negative. So then I would have to distribute the negative first. So then that would be 3, 2i plus 4 minus I. And then back to the same thing, combining like terms. That would be 7 minus 3i. Okay, so that's when it comes to adding and subtracting complex numbers. When it comes to multiplying, you're gonna do the exact same thing. You're gonna actually be distributing that. So then I would have 2/5 times 10, which is gonna give you 20 divided by 5, which would be 4. So that would be 4i, okay? And then we got fraction divided by fraction times a fraction. So that would be the top times the top, the bottom times the bottom. In this case, it's 2 times 5, and then divided by 5 times 2, which is going to give you a 1, right? And then you also have I times I, which is going to give you I squared. Now, what do we know about I squared? We know that I is the same thing as the square root of a negative number. Well, I squared is the same thing as negative 1. So technically this equals to negative 1. So then that would be 4i minus negative 1. Negative times a negative equals a positive, so that would give you 4i plus 1. Okay, when it comes to writing complex numbers, you got to make sure that the I goes second. So I'm actually going to rewrite this to 1 plus 4i, and then that would be your solution. Okay, I know I'm going a little bit fast. Just try to pause the video, come back if there's something you don't understand, and then, once I'm back, we'll figure things out. Okay, one last thing. Again, we're still going to be multiplying. So simplifying the complex solution, remember that now we have, we're still multiplying, but now we have binomials. And how do we multiply binomials? We use the box method. So that would be 3 minus 2i and 3, 2i. And let's just go ahead and multiply. So that would be 3 times 3, which is 9. 3 times 2, which is negative 6i. 3 times 2, which is 6i. And then we got 2i times negative 2i. That would give you negative 4i squared. Now remember again, I squared is the same thing as negative 1. So technically this is negative 4 times negative 1, which is 4. All right, so let's just combine like terms. Those two are going to equal 0. And I'm left with 9 plus 4, right, which is 13. Okay, in this example, the i's just happen to go away. This is not always going to be the case. All right. Other than that, we're gonna skip 4 for a minute, and then I'll teach you that. I'm gonna teach you guys that one when I'm back. Okay. Other than that, hope to see you guys soon. See you guys later.